Right, chapter 25. This is I think this is the penultimate chapter, the last but one. Oh no, two more. Two more after this one. This is chapter 25, Last Chance. And there's a picture here of Tom. It looks like he's going down the stairs, and you can see the grandfather clock. On Friday morning, in the peaceful hour before the others were awake, Aunt Gwen leaned out of bed, boiled the electric kettle, and made an early pot of tea. She poured out a cup for her husband, one for herself, and then she rose to take the third to Tom. She was crossing the little hall with the tea when she stopped dead, frozen at what she saw. The front door of the flat, which Alan himself had locked last night, was open. In a nightmarish moment she saw them all in her imagination. Robbers with skeleton keys, robbers with jemmies, robbers with sacks to carry away the swag, and each man wore a black mask and carried a deadly weapon, a bludgeon, a revolver, a dagger, a length of lead piping. Gwen Kitson was recalled from her attackers by a painful sensation in her fingers. She was trembling so much that hot tea was slopping over the teacup into the saucer and scalding the hand that held it. She set the cup and saucer down on a hall chair, and as she did so she saw why the hall door remained open. It was wedged at the bottom by a pair of bedroom slippers. Tom's. The imaginary burglars vanished. Tom must be responsible. She remembered that he had been found roaming out of bed one night when he had first come to stay with them. She remembered, too, the high words there had been then with Alan, and she decided to manage this by herself. First of all, she had a look outside on the landing. There was no sign of Tom. Then she removed the bedroom slippers, closed the door, and went into Tom's bedroom. There he was, fast asleep, not even shamming, she was sure. She stood over him, the telltale slippers in her hand, wondering what she should say to him. She must scold him, and yet she did not want to be too hard on him and spoil his last day. Even the mild reproach Aunt Gwen had prepared was never uttered. Tom, when she roused him, behaved in a way that too much alarmed her. He opened his eyes, but then again squeezed them shut again, as if against a hateful sight. Once, with his eyes closed, he began talking violently, and in what seemed a senseless way. "No, not this time! Not now!" Aunt Gwen dropped the slippers and fell on her knees by the bed, putting her arms around him. "What is it, Tom? You're awake now. It's morning. You're safe and sound here with me." He opened his eyes and stared at her, and then around him, as though he had expected to see someone, or somewhere, else. "Have you been in a nightmare, Tom? But anyway, it's over. Why, here we are on Friday morning, and tomorrow you're going home." Tom did not answer her, but gradually the unnatural fixity of his look was broken. His aunt kissed him, and then slipped away to fetch him a fresh cup of tea. All she said to her husband was, "It's time, for his own sake, that Tom went home. He's terribly strung up. Bad dreams, nightmares." She thought of a new explanation of the bedroom slippers. "I shouldn't be surprised if he even walked in his sleep." Aunt Gwen did not mention to Tom the bedroom slippers found in the doorway, and Tom, later observing them lying by his bed, only thought that they were yet another part of the mystery of his being here at all. With him under the bedclothes, the laces entwined around the fingers of his left hand, were Hattie's skates that had taken him to Ely, and yet here he was on Friday morning in the Kitsons' flat. He had felt so sure of being able to exchange his time for an eternity of Hattie's, and he was back again after only a few hours of her existence. But perhaps that was because I let myself fall asleep in the gig, Tom thought, and resolved that such a thing should not occur again. For he still had another chance. He had tonight. Tonight he would go down to the garden and stay there for as long as he ever pleased. He debated whether to take the skates with him or not. If the great frost were continuing, he was willing to skate on the pond or on the meadow, but he was not willing to forego the garden altogether, as he had done last time. Perhaps, anyway, the season in the garden would be summer, as it used to be. Tonight, when he opened the garden door, the air that met him might be warm and soft and smelling of flowers. The yew trees across the lawn would welcome him. He would go down the sundial path and then turn right and run along the shadowy tunnel path between the yew trees and the nut stubs and come out into the sunshine again by the asparagus beds, and perhaps see Abel digging a root of horseradish by the early apple tree, and Hattie a little girl again in her blue pinafore waiting to spin her tales for him. For time in the garden can go back, Tom reminded himself, and she may be a little girl again tonight, and we shall play games together. Friday was spent mostly in getting ready for Tom's going home. His things were collected and gone through. His suitcase was polished and relabelled, and his aunts took him out shopping to choose what delicacies he would like for his packed lunch on the train, and what little presents he would take with him to his mother and father and Peter. Tom could not feign interest in what seemed so far away in time. It might be years before he saw his home again tomorrow. That night Aunt Gwen left both bedroom doors open so that she could hear Tom if he got out of bed in his sleep. Tom did not fail to notice his aunt's device. His midnight cunning and soundlessness had grown with weeks of practice. He was out of the flat and starting downstairs without having disturbed the sleepers. He had seen from his bedroom window that the sky was overcast. There was neither moonlight nor starlight. As he went downstairs he could hardly see the oblong of the landing window. "It doesn't matter, though," Tom said, and felt his way surely down to the lower treads and so into the hall. Here he stopped to listen to the grandfather clock, as though it might have some message for him, but the clock minded its own business, and its ticking only gave him a measured reproof to him for an over-hasty beating of his heart. He went down the hall, turned left at the old boot cupboard, and was at the garden door. Suddenly he was in a panic to get out. He tore at the fastening of the door, and though it was the wrong fastening that his fingers found, he would not allow himself to think of that. "I am going to get into the garden," he said between his teeth, and the clocks ticking behind him neither confirmed nor contradicted his words. He had got the door open now, and it was night outside too, as black as the night indoors. He could see nothing. He stood on a step and sniffed the air. There was no frost in it, and yet there was no lingering summer perfume from shut flowers and from grass and leaves. The air seemed empty of smell, except for a faint tang that he could not quite place. "It doesn't matter," said Tom. The blackness did not matter either, because by now he knew the garden by heart. Blindfold he could have found his way. Where should he go first? Across the lawn to the yew trees. He sprang forward and began running. His bare feet fell onto cold stone. He knocked against a tall metal thing, and its lid fell off and rang upon stone again. He shied away, and still ran on in the direction of the yews, but long before he reached the trees, crashed into a wooden fence, and knew that the tang he smelt had been of creosote, and that this was the creosoted fence enclosing the backyard where the ginger-bearded man kept his car, and where the tenants kept his dustbins. He turned and ran then, like a rat with the dogs after it, back into the house. He could not have intended to make another attempt, for he did not close the garden door after him, and he could not have intended to go back to bed, for he halted in the middle of the hall by the grandfather clock, sobbing. The grandfather clock ticked coldly on. A light had gone on somewhere along the landing upstairs, and by it he could see a figure coming down the stairs. He knew in his heart that it could not be she, and yet he screamed to her for help. "Hattie! Hattie!" All over the big house tenants were startled from their sleep. Tom's call, sharp like the bird's warning, reached up even to the topmost flat and woke Mrs. Bartholomew from a dream of her wedding one midsummer day some 60-odd years before. The cry seemed to call her, and Mrs. Bartholomew, muddle-headed with sleep like her tenants, put on the light and began to get out of bed. Alan Kitson jumped the last few steps of the stairs and ran forward and caught Tom in his arms. The boy sobbed and fought as though he were being taken prisoner. Then his uncle felt his body go limp, and he began weeping softly now, but as though he would never stop. Uncle Alan carried Tom upstairs to where his aunt was waiting. Then he went down again to shut the garden door and to reassure the ground floor tenants. Then he went up to his own floor and explained to the other tenant there that his wife's nephew had been sleepwalking. Finally he mounted to old Mrs. Bartholomew's flat. He found her with the front door open, but on a chain. She was pale and trembling, and agitated by the crying she had heard. She listened to his explanation, but without seeming to believe or to understand. She asked wilder and wilder questions, and asked the same ones again and again. At last Anne Kitson lost patience with her, bade her an abrupt good night, and hurried down to the flat below. Aunt Gwen had got Tom back into bed, and was giving him hot milk and aspirin. She came outside with him when she heard her husband in the hall. "I shall stay with him until he sleeps," she said in a low voice, "for he seems quite ill with shock. I suppose it was his waking and finding himself standing there in the dark, all alone, not knowing he was in the hall, or at least not knowing how he got there." "Look," said Uncle Alan, and held up a pair of old-fashioned skating boots and skates. He was carrying these. Aunt Gwen was dumbfounded. What can have possessed him, even in sleep-walking? "And where can he have got them? That's what I'd like to know," said Uncle Alan, examining them with curiosity. "They've been oiled and polished recently, and yet they don't look as if they'd been used for 50 or 100 years. I wonder. You mustn't question him, Alan. Promise me that. He's not fit to be worried." "Very well. If they are his skates, and they're certainly not ours, I'd better put them with his things to-morrow before he leaves." Aunt Gwen was going back into Tom's room, but she remembered something that had puzzled her. When he called out, it sounded from up here as if he were calling someone. "He screamed for his mother, you mean, or his father?" "No, yet I thought it was someone's name." "Oh, it couldn't have been. He just screamed." The mystery deepens. Can't wait now for the next 2 chapters, and then we've finished. Cheerio!